Hey, Darden Church, welcome back to session 6 of Taking God at His Word, where we're trying to empower you to be able to disciple the people that you love within your life. We're going to be continuing examining the book of John, but really, as we've told you before, this series is all about giving you principles and concepts to be able to properly read and interpret Scripture in your life so you can disciple those whom God has placed in your life. So we're going to be continuing in John chapter 3 today, and we're going to get to the end of it. We're going to start in verse 22 of John chapter 3, and I'm going to start reading from there. And the principle that we're going to be talking about today when it comes to Bible study is understanding that when we read the Scriptures, we need to remember it's not always about us, but it's about who we're reading about. And we'll see that as John the Baptist gives us an example of what it looks like to exalt Jesus as we study Scripture and as we seek to live the Christian life. So let's jump into verse 22. This is what John records for us. He says, "After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. John," referring to John the Baptist, "was also baptizing at Aenon near Salem, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized, for John had not yet been put in prison. Now a discussion arose." Now when it says a discussion arose there, probably means a conflict arose. There was probably an argument. It says, "Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, 'Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him.'" So they're saying, listen, everyone's not coming to you to be baptized anymore, but rather they're going to this Jesus guy that you exalted. What's up with that? What should we do with that? And so John answered them. He says, listen, in verse 27, he says, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it's given to him from heaven. You yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete." And then John says this key verse right here in verse 30. He says, "He must increase, but I must decrease." And then in verse 31 goes on to say, "He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth belongs to the earth and speaks in an earthly way. And he who comes from heaven is above all. He bears witness to what he has seen and heard, yet no one receives his testimony. Whoever receives his testimony sets his seal to this, that God is true. For he whom God has sent utters the words of God, for he gives the Spirit without measure." So we're going to stop right there. But here's what's going on that's really important in this passage is that verse 30 is so crucial to discipleship in the Christian life. John the Baptist says, he must increase. In other words, I must exalt Jesus more in my life, and I must say no to myself, and I must decrease. And I think that same concept applies to reading the Scriptures. We have tendencies, especially as Americans, as Westerners, to try to read our individual selves into the Scripture. And we have to be careful. That's not what we're supposed to do. The Scripture is not about our individual lives and stories, but rather the Scriptures are written for us, but not written directly to us. And what I mean by that is this. This particular book of John was written to a group and an audience at a particular time in a particular place, and it was for them specifically, but the principles that are learned in it are still for us. But we have to understand that the Apostle John didn't write this to Pat or Jim or whoever that may be in the 21st century. Rather, it's written for us, that we need to understand the context, the historical context. We need to understand the audience and what's going on in the background for us to properly understand this. And what I love about this verse, he must increase, but I must decrease. It reminds us that when we interpret the Scriptures, when we apply the Scriptures to our life, when we read the Scriptures, it's not about us. It's not about you, but rather it's about exalting Jesus. The Scriptures testify about who Jesus Christ is, what he's come to do, and how he changes our life for the better. And so that's what's so important here. We learn from the Scriptures that Jesus, right? He's the one who substitutes himself in our place. He's the true light of the world, the one who came down from heaven to dwell among us, to redeem us from our sin, and to restore us into a relationship with the Father. That is what the Scriptures testify to. And so for us as believers and as followers of Christ, when we read and apply the Scriptures, it's for the sake of exalting Jesus, of putting him first and not ourselves. And too quickly, we have tendency sometimes to manipulate the Scriptures to make it about ourselves. And what we need to do is when we come to the scriptures, before we read anything, is we need to lay aside any preconceived notions, biases we might have, prejudices we might have, and we need to let the scripture speak for the scripture. We need to let it speak for itself, and then let it testify to us about who Jesus is, if we truly want to exalt him in our life. If we want to disciple the people we love in our lives, then we need to understand that the scriptures are not about us. It's about Jesus, and it's about using the scriptures to point others to the beauty of Christ. So friends, thanks for listening today. I'm so glad you guys joined in. And just remember, he must increase, but I must decrease. It's not about you. It's about Christ. God bless.